Hey, welcome. My name is Rachel Smith, and this is the Natural Health Rising podcast. I am a certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and the owner of Natural Health Rising, which is my online holistic functional medicine company where I help people who have autoimmune diseases, chronic illnesses, mystery symptoms, and a whole host of other imbalances restore their health by natural means. On this podcast, you're going to hear conversations between myself and other health experts on functional medicine and general holistic health. My goal is to provide you with the tools you need in order to help you rise to your healthiest and happiest self. All right, welcome, Laura. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm happy to have you on the podcast. So I always start off with learning more about your story. And I know you went to school kind of from the get-go for health and nutrition and going down that path, but can you take us back a little bit into maybe why you went to school for what you do and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. I went to undergrad at Cornell University, and I really thought I wanted to go into research. I had a soft spot for cancer research. I grew up with just a lot of thyroid cancer and stuff in my family that just hit close to home. So I was all ready to go study genetics and biology and everything that I needed to do. I did study that, but I got a job in a research lab like my first week there and ended up hating it. Just like by myself all the time in these labs. Every PhD student at the time that I talked to was like, don't do this. I'm like, well, this does not seem like a positive feedback situation. It was a great experience, though, being able to learn that side of science and health. But I started getting at the time more into like, okay, well, I want to work with people more around health. So is it medical school? Is it nursing? What direction am I going to go in? Um, Around that time, my mom actually had convinced me to go see a chiropractor, nutritionist. She was living in New York at the time. So I was like a junior in college. I was like, okay, fine. Things are starting to hurt. Might as well. And I was like amazed by this woman. She like loved her job, loved going to work every day. She not only did body work, but she knew all this stuff about nutrition and digestion and was helping me optimize my mental focus just within like an hour of talking to her. And I was like, this seems like a lot of fun. I really want to do this. So I ended up applying to chiropractic school like the next week. And while I was at chiropractic school, I was introduced to functional medicine practitioners in the world of functional medicine. So I knew while I was still in grad school that I was going to go on to do postdoc certifications in functional medicine and kind of go in that direction. But I feel like I got lucky that I had these kind of very different experiences leading me there. So I started in a research background, then did more of like a bodywork structural background, and then got to really dive into nutrition, integrative health, mind body medicine. So I try and incorporate all of that into what I do now.
Okay. So, as far as your own health, did you ever have a personal health struggle where that really came in and made you want to do it even more? Or how has it impacted your personal well-being?
Yeah, around that same time that I had gone and seen that chiropractor who was doing functional medicine, I was like 21 and things just were not feeling right. When you think of, being 2021, you think I should be vibrant, full of energy, I should be in the prime of my life. And I was not having that experience in college. I had so much stress from school. I thought I was doing everything right, going to the gym, hitting the treadmill, doing like all the whole grains, all that stuff. But I was gaining weight. I was so tired all the time. I was having like eczema, dry skin issues, digestion issues, like just nothing seemed great. Um, Everyone that I went to see at the time kind of just said like, oh, it'll go away when you're done with school. It's normal being stressed. But when I started working with more functional practitioners, they were like, we're going to take a deep dive and see what's going on. I found out I had Hashimoto's, which isn't surprising. My mom actually had a history of Hashimoto's, I found out later as well. So for me, that was the start of really learning about what worked best for my body. Doing some nutrition and gut testing and doing elimination diets and seeing how I reacted to different foods. And I found that a lot of the foods that were so-called healthy foods, like whole grains, stuff like that, they really weren't healthy for me. And as soon as I really started cutting them out and reducing inflammation and switching to more strength training instead of hitting the treadmill and managing my stress, all that kind of went away. So I guess I was lucky to have kind of firsthand experience to see how powerful these nutrition and lifestyle changes could be for a chronic condition like Hashimoto's. So that definitely added fuel to the fire with helping others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have some similarities there. I too got diagnosed with Hashimoto's when I was 22. And same thing. I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm not supposed to feel like I'm dying when I'm 21 years old.
Yeah, I have these like vivid memories of I'd go to class from like 6, 7 a.m. till 4 p.m. And then I'd come home and like I had to go lay down. It was not like it would feel nice to lay down. It was like a necessity to go lay down and let my body rest. And that was just, I played, competitive sports growing up. I'm like, this is not how I want to be spending my 20s.
Yep. I've actually, I took naps in my car sometimes in between classes. I've fallen asleep in classes before. Like, yeah, it's definitely not normal. So that's amazing that you were able to find that all at the perfect moment in your life. And for people who don't know, what is Hashimoto's?
Yeah, so Hashimoto's is an autoimmune condition that happens to affect the thyroid gland. Basically, it can cause a ton of symptoms. It often presents as low thyroid symptoms, but what can be confusing about it is during the progression of Hashimoto's, you can actually get these crazy swings between hypo and hyperthyroidism. So for a while, you may feel cold and tired and you're gaining weight and you feel inflamed. And then a couple of months later, you may be tending towards anxiety and elevated heart rate. And it can make it really difficult to kind of, pinpoint symptoms where they're coming from. A lot of times it's just tied into low levels of inflammation, gut health problems. So super, super common in our country, at least. And where I grew up in the Northeast, it's very common.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's dive in a little bit more to some of those root causes. So you said, because a lot of people will think, oh, I have Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism, Graves' disease, whatever the thyroid issue is. And they think, well, that's it. And my thyroid is just messed up. It's broken. But we both know that that's not truly the answer. So what are some of the real reasons why someone would be having issues with their thyroid?
Yeah. And as we dive into it, I think it's really important to understand, like a big piece of this is educating people, right? Like, yes, it's affecting your thyroid, but if we just look at the thyroid, we're missing the bigger picture, which is why so many people who go on thyroid medication, they end up still not feeling better. And they end up in these cycles of constantly changing their medication up and down in dosage and still don't really feel better. And it's because we're just touching the surface level. We're looking at the organ that's affected, the thyroid, but we're not taking a step back and saying, okay, well, autoimmune condition, this is actually immune system dysfunction that happens to affect the thyroid. So I always like to talk with clients about that first, regardless of, whether we're talking about Hashimoto's or Crohn's or rheumatoid arthritis, like what they have in common is it's immune system dysfunction. And if we just spot treat where they're showing up, we're really not going to get those results. So when we look at the things that can lead to problems with our immune system where it gets out of whack, I always like to start by looking at the gut. You and I both know how important it is. I really talk with clients going all the way back to like when they were kids and babies, just to kind of get a feel for what's their gut health been like for their entire life. What was the situation around their birth? Was it a vaginal birth? Was it C-section? Were they sick a lot as a kid? Did they have to go on antibiotics all the time? Were they breastfed, formula fed? These all kind of set the stage for our gut health and the kind of bacteria that we have in our gut. And a lot of times what I'll see in people who have Hashimoto's and other autoimmune conditions are they either had a lot of situations growing up where they were sick, they were eating a lot of inflammatory standard American diet foods, they were on antibiotics a lot. And then eventually what happens is they're hit with like another major stressor, which seems like, oh, well, this happened and all of a sudden I have Hashimoto's, but it's never that, right? It's always this triggering event, and we really want to see what set the stage for it. So looking at gut health from a big picture is really important. And then we kind of know we can go in and support that, clear out the inflammatory foods, get a lot of good healing, nutrient dense foods into the gut. You know, maybe do some further functional testing, see what's going on with if there's any dysbiosis or gut infections going on that can be kind of triggering inflammation, you know, leading to increased intestinal permeability, these things that set the stage for errant immune function.
Right.
Yeah.
So what would the treatment difference look like in someone who you do go through their history and they say, yeah, I was C-section and I was on a bunch of antibiotics and formula fed, versus the opposite of that?
Yeah, which like I hear that, and that was totally me. I was like C-section, formula fed baby, like very clear differences between my sister and I that set the stage for me to be much more prone to this than my sister. So I always find like family differences really interesting. Not to get too off topic there, but usually what I'll do, especially if someone's been like having these issues going on for a while, maybe they're also dealing with gut inflammation, bloating, that kind of stuff. I do like to do some testing and really get a feel for like, what is that microbiome like? What I really want to make sure is that there isn't any issues like, is there candida overgrowth? Is there a SIBO situation that we really need to get in and hit with like some antimicrobials first? But I think if someone does have this history of, like we said, the C-section, the formula fed, all the antibiotics, I think going in and making changes to really support like growth of healthy gut bugs is going to be really important. Maybe that looks like probiotics. Maybe that looks like fermented foods and, you know, getting a lot of nutrient dense foods in there, things like bone broth and grass-fed meats and things like that. Whereas for someone that maybe had a little bit of a stronger gut microbiome going in, they may not need the depth of gut support that someone else does. So I do think it's important to look at it on a person by person basis. I mean, that's what can be frustrating for a lot of people with autoimmune conditions with Hashimoto's, is they see a friend or a family member who did really well with one treatment method, and they're like, well, why isn't that working for me? And we have to remember, like, we all have such a different makeup in our gut and our genes, everything else, that it really has to be personalized.
Yeah, definitely. And in regards to probiotics and fermented foods, is there one that you prefer over the other when you're trying to help support and kind of grow back the missing bacteria?
Sure. I always love doing things through food first, if I can. Obviously, some of this, when you're working with people, also depends on each client's willingness to change their nutrition. For some people, adding in things like sauerkraut and kimchi, that's like a no fly zone. They're not going to do it. So some of it is seeing like, are they willing to eat these foods? Can we at least start to get it that way? In terms of probiotics, I mean, there's so many out there. I'm sure you've seen this from your own research. Like, some seem to work, some don't seem to work. There's always a new study coming out saying they're good, they're bad, blah, blah, blah. So
Yeah.
I always like to do, I think at least doing like trials is helpful. At the end of the day, some people do really well with probiotics. Some people do very poorly with probiotics. So I think it's important to like be in contact with these clients as we work through it, because if they're on a probiotic for 2 weeks and all of a sudden they're getting horrible gut symptoms, they have bloating all the time, they don't feel well, probiotics may not be a good fit for them. So they may be someone who we really do have to do things more through food and nutrition and diet. And maybe that looks like doing a very personalized elimination diet just to kind of clear out some inflammation, kind of reset the stage for a good, healthy gut microbiome. Maybe that's teaching like some fasting methods, do a little bit of gut reset that way. Good 24-hour fast can do some great things for a little bit of a gut reset. So all of these different tools we have that we can kind of combine based on a patient's lifestyle and symptoms and everything that's going on.
Yeah. And So we've touched on Hashimoto specifically, but I know you deal with a lot of different autoimmune diseases. And so what is the prevalence of these autoimmune diseases in the women that you work with? Because you're working with more like the high achieving women, busy ladies. So what is that connection there?
Sure. I still see it fairly commonly. I think a lot of them tend to ignore symptoms, to be honest with you. They're very like mentally driven women, and they will push through until they literally can't anymore. Um, but what I'll see a lot is versus like a strict diagnosis coming in, like I definitely still see a lot of Hashimoto's. It's so common. But instead of people coming in saying like, hey, I'm looking for help with, this autoimmune condition or that autoimmune condition, it's more they're at the stage where they're coming in with kind of vague symptoms, like a little brain foggy, maybe don't have the energy that they want. We run their labs. We can see there's some inflammation, some immune activity, but it hasn't really necessarily always gotten to the point where they have like an actual diagnosis, which can be really great because the earlier you find out that there's immune activity going on, the easier it is to kind of implement some changes and calm down that immune system. To be honest, most of the women I work with now they at least value like wellness. They've been trying things for their diet. They've been reducing inflammation in their life. So they're in a little bit of a situation that can be different. My old brick and mortar practice was really heavily geared specifically towards autoimmune clients. So that was a different case. I saw like some really sick people who just had not had much luck in the conventional field with trying to get help for their symptoms. A lot were trying to come off some of these hard hitting medications, and we're just more in that learning stage of how nutrition can affect your body, how lifestyle can affect your body. But I would say in my current clients, I think like Hashimoto's is still probably the most common autoimmune thing I see coming in. A lot of women know they have it. They're just keeping an eye on it. They're trying to really optimize their health as much as they can.
Mm-hmm. What about for someone who hasn't been diagnosed with Hashimoto's yet? Because I know this happens a lot. Someone will have hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism, but their Hashimoto's keeps getting missed. So why is it getting missed? Like, what are the correct labs that they should actually be running and looking for?
Sure. Yeah. The biggest thing I see with women missing that diagnosis is they'll go and they'll get, their labs tested, and they pretty much get TSH run, maybe total T4, maybe. But what we know is like the thyroid's a pretty crazy gland. Like it will do as much as it can to normalize that TSH. So I like to run an expanded thyroid panel on anyone that I'm suspecting thyroid dysfunction or hypothyroidism on, which goes much past just TSH. So yes, we look at TSH. Yes, we still run total T4 and T3, but we add on free T4 and T3. So difference between free and total hormones. Total hormones also include hormones that are bound to carry your proteins. They're not available to do work. So we want to see those free fractions, which are the amount of thyroid hormone able to go bind to different tissues and actually do their job. That's very important for sure, especially for women who are on medication, because we want to make sure that that's converting from T4 to T3 as well. And then we'll run what's called an antibody panel, which looks at thyroid antibodies. They're called TPO antibodies, tissue transglutaminase antibodies. This lets us see if there's actually any immune activity going on that's directly affecting the thyroid tissue. More commonly, we'll see the Hashimoto situation, but we also check to make sure that there's not like autoimmune Graves' disease, which is an autoimmune hyperthyroidism. But just getting those antibodies tested, even if it's just once a year in someone that has hypothyroidism, can save like a lot of grief if that's what's causing the thyroid to not feel great. And like we mentioned earlier, it's a very different approach if we see there's immune activity going on. A Synthroid, a thyroid medication alone, it might normalize the TSH on the labs, but it's not going to fix that underlying inflammation and immune activity that's going on. I think that's why a lot of women are like, well, they told me my labs are normal, but I still feel tired and I'm gaining weight and my hair's falling out. It's because we're not looking at this like bigger picture of what's going on at the thyroid. We're just looking at that TSH value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear it every day from people.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great if we could standardize getting the antibody tests for most other doctors? That would be really nice.
Right. I
Um,
mean, I see people like my mom who she still has trouble just having people run like her T3 and free T3 for her. Like thankfully I can order it for her now, but
yeah.
it's hard for a lot of people if they don't have someone advocating for them to get these labs that they really want and to ask for them and to get that yes.
Hmm. Yeah, actually walk through how would someone ask? Like, do they just go to their doctor with this list and say, this is what I need? Or what's the best approach to actually getting somebody to listen to them?
Yeah, so some of it depends, like what state are you in? I mean, we're here in Arizona where someone can just walk into any lab test now and ask for tests they want. They don't need a script. Other states, that's not the case. You do need a physician script. So if I have a client coming to me who they're like, I really want, to work through my insurance, what can I ask my endocrinologist, my doctor for? I'll give them the list. Sometimes I'll say like, hey, do you want me to like personally leave a message at your doctor's office? Here's my contact information for them to reach out. I just offer that as part of my services to help them advocate for their care. But I also like to remind people, and this might sound a little harsh, but like if you're consistently going to your doctor and they're telling you no, and your gut is like, I really need this, like, I know I need to check into this, like maybe it's time to find a new doctor. Because if your doctor isn't at least willing to sit down and have that conversation with you and say, look, like, I understand you want this. Here's why I don't think you need it. If they immediately are just very dismissive, that just might not be a good fit for what you want in a healthcare provider, right?
Yes, I totally agree with that. Totally agree.
Yeah.
So, and what is so while we're on the topic of Hashimoto's and everything, what's your go-to approach with these people? Like, what's the first thing, the most important thing to do, whether it's diet, sleep, stress management? Where do you go first?
Yeah, so those are my top three.
Okay.
Literally. But yes, first and foremost, at least in the women I work with, sleep and stress management are like the first pillars we work through. You can be eating a really healthy diet. And if you are so stressed, if you don't have effective stress management techniques for you, if you're not setting boundaries, if you're not sleeping, it's only going to get so far with nutrition, with supplements. If you really need to build these strong foundations, we need you to sleep. We need you to manage your stress so that you're not constantly in this panic, fight or flight or freeze mode. We want to make sure you're moving your body, even if it's just walking. And in terms of nutrition, I mean, I think the cool thing about nutrition is everyone can have a different nutritional approach. It's human nature to try and find like a one size fits all, right? People get very passionate about their way of eating. I think we can see that happening a lot. But ultimately, I think it can be really cool to watch a woman start to understand how her body reacts to different foods at different times. Like how she eats right now may be different than how she eats in the spring, or eating during a super busy season at work might look different than when she's able to relax and doesn't have a lot on her plate. And seeing how different things can impact her, not just her physical health, but her mental health, her sleep quality, her recovery. I always just love watching when those like light bulbs start to go off and people are like, oh, wow, okay. Like I do not feel good when I eat that, even though it's not a bad food, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I always start sleep, stress management. We make sure some movement's getting in. And then with nutrition, I like to see for most women, what can we add into their diet first versus immediately going into restriction. I just don't mentally think that that's the best idea for a lot of people. So what can we add in that's very nourishing, that's anti-inflammatory? And if there's things that are like very just not serving you, what can we do to make each client understand that connection, right? So something I think of a lot is like the stressed out woman grabbing a glass of wine at night to wind down. Like not anti-wine by any means, but when you're having a glass every night, that adds up to 7 glasses a week, bottle and a half, 2 bottles a week. You're telling me that you're not sleeping well, that you wake up at 2 o'clock every morning, that you have trouble getting out of bed, that you have bags under your eyes. Like, how can we make you understand that connection, maybe the first step is switching to like organic sulfite-free wines. Maybe it's having wine just a couple times a week. Maybe it's just taking a break for 30 days and just letting your body recalibrate, right? So kind of meeting people where they're at and starting to make sustainable changes when it comes to nutrition and really teaching them the connection between what they're consuming and how they feel and how they're performing is really important.
Okay. And so you consider yourself like a health strategist for these women. And so in addition to all the things you just said, like what does that really mean to you and to your clients? Like how are you strategizing and building out a plan for them?
Yeah. So I started practicing from this place of finding strategy for women, because something that I saw was I kept having these women come in and they went and they worked with a gut specialist or a hormone specialist, or they did a stress course or something like that. But they were still like spot treating different issues. And ultimately, every year, they were still looking for what's the best diet? What's the best plan? Who do I need to hire this year? Nothing ever fit into a cohesive strategy that was sustainable in the long run. Like I think a few years ago, I mean, it's still big, but like keto and fasting together was huge for a while in these high performing women. And they all started hitting a wall where they started not feeling great and losing their hair and things like that. But all they knew how to do was do keto and fast, which they're tools, right? But for women especially, like might not serve people in the long run to be doing that for years and years. So by being a strategist, we say, okay, you had good results with these things, but what we really need to do is think about, what do you want for the long term? Like, what are your goals for your health? Like, yes, we want to feel good. We want to look good. We want to perform well. We don't want to be spending all this time thinking and planning about our own health. So if you start to reverse engineer that and say, okay, well, let's make sure we get a strategy for the basics down first. We're going to sleep. We're going to get sunlight. We're going to drink water. We're going to move our body in a very sustainable way, meaning we're not doing like super intense boot camps 8 times a week. There's a time and a place for that. We're learning about our hormones and what they actually do. Maybe we're cycle syncing. Maybe we're, making sure our gut and our liver are happy. And how do we support these through everyday food and lifestyle measures? Let's introduce you to things like how to use sauna and acupuncture and all these other cool things to make you feel good on a daily basis. And then we see what's left and we figure out what you really need to hone in on and maybe hit with like some supplements, some really personalized changes for a while. So I think that's still a piece that was missing when I would listen to these women coming in, is they'd see, I have this one client who sticks out in my head. I met her. The only thing she was able to eat when I met her was ground beef. And she'd been eating that way for a year, not by choice. This was before carnivore got super popular. It was that if she ate anything besides ground beef, she got so bloated and uncomfortable and constipated. It was like she couldn't go do things in her life. And what had happened was she kept seeing gut doctors who were like, you have SIBO, you have this, you have that. And it just kept lowering everything she could eat and do, to the point that now she was just eating ground beef and coconut oil and felt like she didn't have the quality of life she wanted anymore. So I think about just, okay, well, maybe it helped her with some symptoms, but that was not sustainable in the long run. So here's this person who went to try and find, good lifestyle stuff. And there was never any strategy in place for what was going on with her sleep, with her hormones, with inflammation. It was just what's in the gut and let's kill it all. So being able to take a step back and saying, okay, what are these bigger strategies? How do we use all of these different tools? And how do we teach you how to use these tools situationally? Like when you're in a busy season, when you're, trying to build lean muscle in the gym, when you're having issues with your cycle, so that you kind of learn really how to take your health back into your own hands instead of always having to call someone and do the Dr. Google thing and figure out what's going on.
Yeah. Well, before we move on, I need to know, how did you get this woman out of eating just beef? What was like the big changes that she
she's
made?
like one of my closest friends. I still remember it was like one of the first clients I had when she came out to Arizona, and it's like my first time meeting her. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is where I'm going to start here. Holy moly. So it was very, very gradual. Like we still went in and did some more testing with, I think she had like had it with gut testing at that point. So we like did some blood work. We checked into some inflammation levels, looked at things like that, looked at like brain inflammation to see if that was a big part of the picture. It was. So there was definitely like some signaling issues going on from brain to gut that were just really impacting her ability to digest food. So we started with a lot of like nervous system regulation stuff, breath work, body work, deep breathing, things like that. We got some fats into her diet pretty easily with a little bit of like digestive enzyme support. Talked a lot about, mindfulness around eating, chewing your food, doing all that kind of stuff. It was definitely the most challenging to get like some fiber and carbs back in. It's still challenging for her, but we started like pureeing all the foods, like pureeing them with some bone broth, like literally tablespoon at a time, and just building up to the point where she could tolerate it more and more as she was able to expand the flora that was in her gut more and more. We're talking years. Like I met her 3 years ago. So now she has a little more flexibility. Cooked veggies are still easier than raw, but she can like go out to dinner with her husband and doesn't have to like ask the waiter for a plate of ground beef. That's a huge quality of life thing, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the nervous system thing you just said for a second. What is that relationship between our nervous systems and stress, and how that reflects into, manifesting into disease?
Yeah, I still feel like it's being talked about more, but I feel like the nervous system is just this forgotten piece. It literally controls everything we do. I mean, it's so important. Like we have to be using this as a central part of anything going on. Specifically as related to stress and the gut health, like we know that everyone's heard of things like your fight or flight nervous system. It's called the sympathetic nervous system. It's kind of the part that helps us run away from danger and all that stuff. But there's this other part called the parasympathetic nervous system, which is often called your like rest and digest. The two need to be balanced. If we're constantly in fight or flight sympathetic overdrive, it's really hard for those parasympathetic, that rest and digest part of your nervous system to actually do its job. So that second word there, digest, if we're not getting nervous system activation to the gut, if we're not getting signals from brain to gut that says, hey, it's okay, you have time to sit here and digest this food, it impacts everything from the movement of our bowels to production of digestive enzymes and stomach acid, like all of these basic things we need to be able to break down our food, absorb the nutrients, have it move through and not cause, stagnation and constipation. So I see it now a lot with the women I work with. They're always eating on the go, like they're doing 5,000 things. So we work really hard. I send them text reminders daily, like, hey, did you sit for 2 minutes and just like breathe before you ate? Put your phone down and like remind your body and your nervous system that it's safe to digest food. Like you're not running away from tigers and lions anymore. Like you can sit and break down this food. It's still the most powerful thing. People are like, oh, I didn't realize just chewing my food and breathing for a minute, like I'm not bloated anymore. And like, it's really that simple. It doesn't always have to be fancy supplements and crazy diets. It can be just mindfulness and understanding how your body works.
Yeah. What are some other ways you help women proactively manage their stress?
Yeah. So another thing that we talk a lot about is our perception of stress. This can get like a little woo-woo, but I think it's not a bad thing to talk about. We all know that we all know that person who like thrives on a deadline, right? Like if they have a deadline, they're so productive, like stuff gets done. And like stress can be a good thing. But what I find a lot of women do is they constantly are telling themselves how bad stress is. They're like, oh, I'm so stressed. I'm so busy. I have no time. I feel awful because I'm so stressed. And you're kind of directing like your body and your nervous system how to react in that moment. There was this study done somewhere, I can't remember where. It was people that were like getting ready to go do public speaking, and like they all had a little bit of nerves. And half of those people just like had to sit in silence. And the other half basically like were told, hey, we want you to like channel that nervousness and get excited, like jump around, yell, clap your hands. And what they found were the people that were able to channel that stress into excitement, into a different feeling like that, they performed better. They didn't remember being nervous. They didn't like have jitters and things like that. Whereas people who were just in a room quietly, like thinking about it, were still very nervous when they went on stage. Not that there's anything wrong with like quiet and meditation, but wiring your mindset to think about stress in the moment as something that can be good can be very powerful for how you react to it.
That's really cool. So if we're about to go speak on a stage, do you jump around and get all excited?
I haven't spoken on a stage since I read that, but I'm going to do it next time and see if I notice a difference. I always joke that like I've never felt mentally stressed before speaking, but I definitely get like some of those physical reactions for 5 minutes, like a little shaky. So I'm going to try that next time and see if it changes.
Yeah, let me know.
It'd be fun.
Yeah. And so what other ways would they transform that stress? So say I'm a stressed out woman and I have this big project to do and I'm looking at it, I'm freaking out. What do I do to channel that energy and switch it over?
Yeah, there's a couple different things. Obviously telling yourself like how you want to feel about it can be very powerful. Like just taking a step back and being like, yes, this is a lot on my plate, but like, how awesome is it that I get to do this? Or taking a step back and saying, I'm excited about this, but this is a lot for me to do on my own. Where can I delegate? Where can I ask for help? That can be challenging for a lot of women, but that seriously can cut down on their stress around things. A lot of that stress can come from just us trying to do everything on our own all the time, and like learning to ask for help can be a very powerful thing. And then making sure that we're also doing things while we're stressed that we know help down regulate that part of our nervous system. So if people are attached to their phones all day, we say, you know what, let's go in your calendar and we're going to schedule like some deep breathing breaks during the day. Maybe that's, morning, afternoon, and night, where we just sit for 5 minutes and just do some deep breathing, do like a little guided visualization, something that's efficient, but that we know still brings that nervous system regulation down. So I always joke when people have like the wearables, like the Apple Watches, like how many times the little breathing reminders pop up and they're like, oh, stop it, leave me alone. Like, what if we listen to it for that 1 minute a couple times a day when it tells you to take a step back and breathe? That 1 minute of time away from work can end up really enhancing your productivity and response to stress in the long run.
I love that you said I get to do this. I was just talking about this with gratitude the other day, like waking up and saying, I get to go to work. I get to take care of my kids. I get, if it's a crazy busy day with them, or I get to do this or that, instead of saying,
Right.
oh, I have to, is also bringing in a sense of gratitude for that piece. And so that's cool. I like that. That's also related to the stress piece and calming down that stress level.
Yeah, because when you think about it, like you said, for the most part, some of the most common stressors are like a busy work schedule, trying to fit in time to like exercise and eat right, taking care of kids. But like these are all also really awesome things. So just checking in with yourself and being like, okay, today's schedule is pretty packed, but like, hey, I get to show up and work in the business that I created, and I get to go move my body, even if it's for 20 minutes. And I get to buy this food that tastes really good and nourishes my body. And I get to go pick up my kids from the school that they get to go to. So simple things, but it really rewires your brain to be like, oh yeah, right. Lots of stuff, but also like really great stuff.
Yeah, totally. That's awesome. Now let's switch tracks to let's talk about some myth busting. What are some common myths around protein?
So many. First is that active women only need 50 grams a day, like our country's nutritional recommendations say. I still find women are so afraid of eating protein. And like, I feel like it's just the answer to most of the top complaints I hear. Like, you want to build muscle and get toned, like you need to eat more protein. Like, you want stable energy levels, eat more protein. Like, you want to perform well, sleep well, eat more protein. So I think, especially if you're an active woman, which most of the women I work with are, like they're mobile during the day, they're working out, like only getting in 50 to 60 grams is not doing them any favors in the long run. So really like doubling that, maybe even tripling that, depending on a woman's, height and muscle mass, can solve a lot of problems. I usually suggest women start by trying to get like aim for 30 grams at a meal 3 times a day, like good starting point, and see how you feel. But I think as women get comfortable with having more protein, a lot of those blood sugar swings, energy fluctuations, not getting the results they want from workouts, those kind of solve themselves just by focusing on that one macronutrient. So, even with tracking food, a lot of women, they get a little crazy with tracking food. So we kind of back off of that and say, like, just track your protein. Just make sure you're eating enough protein during the day. It's like so much less stressful, hold you accountable. You realize you get full more easily, your energy's nice and stable. So that would be the first one. That don't be afraid of protein.
Okay. And what do you have a very simple way of explaining to women, like, this is what 30 grams looks like a certain amount of eggs or steak or whatever that looks like?
Yeah, I have like a quick PDF, which I'm happy to like send you to give out to your audience if that's something they want to do. That basically just has pictures of like super common foods. Like this is what it might look like at breakfast. Like it's this much chicken, it's this much fish or whatnot. Um, Generally somewhere in like the 4 to 6 ounces of most like meats is going to get you there, especially if it's pretty lean cut. Couple of eggs, maybe eggs with some egg whites, adding in things like, instead of having one egg for breakfast, like have an egg or two, add in some egg whites for some extra protein, or do like a protein shake on the side with your eggs and your veggies and your toast or whatever you're having. I don't love to like tell women to do meal replacement shakes, but if you're super active, like in the gym, let's say you're lifting a lot, like using those shakes as a supplement to your meals can really help get that protein amount up as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. If you have any resources, I'd be happy to link
Yeah.
those up in the podcast somehow. And were there any other myths that we needed to go over?
I know this one's a little bit of a heated topic, but I still, in terms of protein quality, I'll see a lot of things like, it's this much meat or it's this much broccoli to get to 10 grams of protein or something like that. It's not the same.
No.
It's not I think to get the amount of protein most women need through like just vegetable sources requires such a high amount of, quantity. It's just unrealistic for a lot of women to meet it. I do work with some vegetarians and vegans, but we are definitely supplementing protein in that case. I think it's really hard to get it through diet alone. And I think the quality of that protein is very different. When we look at animal proteins, obviously, yes, we want good quality animal protein, but it's a very complete protein that comes with a lot of vitamins, minerals, other things. The reason that like food combining was so popular years ago is people realized that a lot of plant foods have some protein, but they're not complete proteins. So you had to combine things to get all of the amino acids you needed to really build proteins. And this can really translate to having to eat a lot of carbs, a lot of food to get the protein you want. The last kind of thing I'll say on that is like, if you're familiar with something called the protein leverage hypothesis, it's basically like, doesn't matter how many calories you eat, your body will keep making you hungry until it meets the demand for protein. So when women aren't eating enough protein, they may end up feeling like they're constantly snacking. They're like, I know I ate enough, but I'm like late at night, I'm just grabbing these foods because their body is trying to get whatever they need to get this protein, especially if they're active. So I think, really just focusing on protein intake solves that problem. And women find, oh, well, once I started focusing on my protein, I wasn't grabbing all of these late night snacks. I wasn't feeling like I had to binge eat a bunch of food all the time. So I think that's something really important for women to learn and understand.
Yeah. Thanks for saying all that. I am really big on animal products and trying to promote that. And I'm always feel like there's this constant battle between, because we us and the vegans, and
Yeah.
I'm always trying to explain, hey, all of these things can happen to our bodies if we don't have enough amino acids, osteoporosis, osteopenia, other just I mean, would you like to speak on that piece as well? I think that's important for people to understand, like, what are the negative outcomes that could occur, especially as we age or even currently, if we're not getting enough protein?
Yeah. I mean, especially as women, as we start to age, like once women hit menopause and beyond that, their need for protein actually increases even more, because as we age, it's harder and harder to maintain skeletal muscle mass, lean muscle mass. So something called sarcopenia kicks in, which is losing muscle. We don't want that. So actually, once like we start to get into our 50s and 60s, our protein requirements go up even higher. So imagine you already were going through life not getting enough protein, and then this happens. Like you said, you become at risk for muscle loss, and your muscle isn't just on your biceps and your quads. It's also your diaphragm, it's your heart, it's in your blood vessels. Like we want muscle. Put you at higher risk for, like we said, the osteopenia, osteoporosis. We don't want brittle bones either, let alone like some nutrient deficiencies that come from, we look at animal products, we know they're very rich in things like vitamin A, zinc, magnesium, all these things that can be hard to get through plant-based stuff alone. That being said, I also just say, like I said earlier, people have this tendency to try and find this one size fits all solution. Like nutrition is not one size fits all. We're not the same person. So we can't tell one person they have to eat a certain way because it's what we want to do. And I think if for, philosophy reasons, you do want to eat a plant-based diet, understanding where the gaps in there are and being aggressive about supplementing those is going to be really important for you.
Totally. Yeah. Getting proper education on what is going to support your body, no matter what you want to eat.
Right.
And you're also big on cycle syncing your nutrition for optimal insulin sensitivity. So can you explain, first off, what is insulin sensitivity for the listeners? And then what is cycle syncing, and go into that?
Yeah. So when we look at what insulin sensitivity is in a very simple way, it's basically how efficient is your body, how efficient are your cells at taking the energy we get from our food and partitioning it or sending it where it's needed. So like we eat a big meal or things like that. How efficient are we at breaking it down, at putting some away for energy, at pushing it into the cells to be stored, versus are we tending more towards like an insulin resistance, which is like the gates on the cells are closed, like body is breaking down food, the insulin is sending signals like food is incoming, let's put it away, and the cells don't get the signal to open the gates and store it. This leads to like high blood sugar, which we know is just problematic for so many things in terms of inflammation, in terms of energy levels, in terms of cardiovascular health. As women, so this is particularly relevant for a woman with a menstrual cycle who is not on birth control. We are a little more insulin sensitive in the first half of our cycle than we are in the second. And we can really use this to our advantage in a lot of ways. And that's what cycle syncing does. It teaches women what's actually going on in their menstrual cycle, which I don't think our educational system does a great job of. Hopefully that changes. And it helps us understand, the differences in the first and second half of that cycle, and how can we support our bodies nutritionally in different ways? How can we support it with workouts in different ways? So in that first half of our cycle, when we're very insulin sensitive, we do a pretty good job of breaking down different food groups and utilizing them. So like, I like to make the analogy, if you're a woman who's in the gym and you're trying to build muscle, like this is a great time for some heavy lifting, to do some like carbohydrate refeeds. Like your muscles are going to be able to take all that up and use it to grow. In the second half of our cycle, when we're not as insulin sensitive, we can have a little bit more trouble partitioning those nutrients, especially carbohydrates. So it's not as easy for us to like break down carbs and store them or use them. And it's also not as easy for us to like dip into our stored energy right away. So like first half of the cycle, things just may feel easier in terms of nutrition. Like, you can eat breakfast at different times. You can skip breakfast and do fasting. It feels easy. Second half of the cycle, that may feel really hard. So what I like to do in that second half of the cycle is let's eat a little more consistently during the day. Let's, respect what's going on with our insulin sensitivity, it not being that great. Make sure we have some healthy fats, maybe not overdo it on a ton of carbohydrates at that point. And just kind of respect what's going on naturally with our hormones.
Okay. How do you help women keep track of this? Do they map it out on their calendar, saying, hey, eat these foods during these weeks and not these weeks?
Yeah. So if I'm working with somebody one-on-one, like we do that together just during our time working together. There's so many apps out now for like tracking your cycle that usually what we'll do is we'll just track it and they'll share their calendar with me and we'll kind of take it week by week so that they understand what's going on in each week. There's some apps now like, what's it called? Like Floka, Floka, that they literally can build like cycle syncing recommendations into a menstrual tracking app. So you can like, someone would download that app, they'd be tracking their cycle, and then you can even like get in and send them specific things that it would like show up in the app. So there's lots of different ways to do that, but I like spending a cycle or two with women kind of going through how we do this. And then it's just their personal preference. Do they want this written as a guide? Do they want things that like show up daily, like in an app? What's their best way of learning?
So that's cool. I haven't heard of Floka. I use a different tracking app, but I don't believe it has any sort of specific ways to do like a food syncing or something. So I'll have to look into that and maybe link it up in the show notes for people.
Yeah, there's another one too called wild.ai that does that as well. That one's specifically geared at like female endurance athletes. You can still use it even if you're not, but it comes through with different nutritional suggestions at different points in your cycle.
Okay, amazing. And what about fasting? Do you incorporate fasting with the women you work with? And would that then be used in the first half of the cycle?
Yeah, so I like using fasting for myself. If I have a woman who's interested in learning about it, we'll definitely teach fasting methods. I like to explain that fasting is like a muscle. You have to train your body how to do it. And there's lots of different ways to do it. So you wouldn't go into a gym and like deadlift 500 pounds without training for it. And you also wouldn't go to a gym and do the same workout day in, day out forever and expect the same results, right? Same goes with fasting. Generally, like first half of a woman's cycle is going to be a better time for fasting, especially if she's playing around with like longer fasts. Maybe like a 24-hour fast, or maybe every couple of months she wants to do like a 3-day fast or something like that. Those are going to feel much easier in the first half of her cycle than the second. In the second half of a woman's cycle, I generally suggest she really doesn't do fasting unless it's like a very low level circadian intermittent fasting, something like a 13 to 15-hour fast, which is like a pretty standard eating window. That would be like having dinner at 6 o'clock at night and then not having breakfast till like 7, 8 the next morning. But that'll be a little easier for her. And by kind of cycling fasting through the month that way, she's not going to run into some of those negative effects a lot of women can experience with fasting, like hormones crashing and hair loss and, things like that. Yeah, so you can definitely time those as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I also hear this too. Sometimes people will share with me and say, well, I've been fasting every day for X amount of months and I haven't lost any weight, or this hasn't happened, this result that I'm expecting. What's going wrong there?
Yeah. And it's like, well, how much are you fasting? Because if you're just like barely eating most days, that's not fasting, that's starvation. And like, that's not going to be beneficial for most people. I find a lot of the women that are doing that are also women who are like super active, right? Like we learn new things and we go all in on them. I mean, I definitely did that years ago when I first started learning fasting, totally overdid it because I felt so good when it started, and then I was like, oh, my hair's falling out. This is not good anymore. I need to learn how to use this correctly because it's a tool. So yeah, when women are like, I'm fasting all the time, I'm not getting the results, like you also still need to eat too. Like you can't have your body think it's in starvation mode all the time. It's about being metabolically flexible to be able to change the amount of calories you're eating from day to day and kind of get those different benefits of it, especially if you're exercising and being active. I mean, you can't be doing like regular weight training and all this stuff and constantly be fasting too. Like those two things are not aligned. It's like if you're really trying to build muscle, fasting all the time is not necessarily going to put you in the right place for that. And then just as women too, like we need some of these foods just to like help build hormones and support hormone balance as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I did the same thing when I, like 5 years ago, I started intermittent fasting and I was going so crazy with it. My menstrual cycle disappeared. And at the time, this was before I knew all that I know now. And I was like, I didn't make the connection and I just kept fasting.
Right.
So
this is true. Most people do feel so good incorporating some fasting methods, but it's like, you need to be able to understand that it's a tool and not like get addicted to it almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, I know we're running out of time here. So
by so fast.
I know I have so many other questions for you. Maybe we'll do another podcast. Well, I always ask people if you could leave our listeners with one action that they can take this week to help them live a healthier, happier life, what would it be?
Pick up the phone or get in your car and go see someone you love who you haven't checked in on for a while. Like if you live by family or if there's someone you haven't called in a while, like, look, at the end of the day, like if people look back and say, what are things I wish I did more of that made me really happy? It's not like fasting or taking supplements. It's talking more about people they love. And I think coming off the last year and a half, like we realized the importance of human connection. So call somebody up that you haven't talked to, an old friend, a family member that you haven't checked in with lately, and just like say, hey, how you doing? Thinking of you. I love you. Like have a human connection moment.
I love that. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking time to chat today. If you'd like to share any other information, if you have any upcoming programs or anything we didn't talk about that you want to share, and then also you can just let our listeners know like where they can find you, reach out to you if they have any other questions.
Sure. So I do have, like I mentioned earlier, my whole thing is about helping women learn how to build their health strategy so they can stop searching for diets and answers and how-tos year after year. So the methods I use with my clients, I have turned into a course. It's called the POWER45 method. Until now, I've only taught it in like a live group coaching method, but it's going to be a course, which is great because you can do it anytime, anywhere at your own pace. It literally takes you through everything from sleep, nutrition and gut health, stress management, hormones, brain performance, biohacking, and teaches you how to implement these different things into a cohesive, sustainable strategy. That's coming out in just a little over a month. So right now I'm just taking names onto a pre-sale wait list who will be the first to find out and kind of get some special introductory pricing. You can find that at my website, drlauradicesaris.com/power45 course. And other than that, I'm on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn under Dr. Laura DeCesaris. I can get you the links for them if that's the easiest for people to find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And all that stuff will be linked up in the show notes for everybody to reach out to you.
Hey, thanks for watching the episode. I really hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure that you like the video and leave a comment and share it with a friend who really needs to hear it. Because when you share this information, you're also going to help other people level up their health. And if you or somebody else you know wants to work on their health and they're looking for a functional medicine practitioner, feel free to reach out to me to apply to work together. Thanks for watching and keep striving to become your healthiest, happiest self.